before, and if you were here for that, perhaps you remember her story about catching her elderly father in the act. You're one of the brothers, right? In the act at his assisted living facility. Tonight, Holly will share a very different kind of story. Holly's story tonight is a story about the connection between her husband and a neighbor's baby boy, and their ages apart, but they had something in common. In his poem, Mending Wall, Robert Frost wrote, "Good fences make good neighbors." But Holly's story proves that we can be pretty darn good friends without fences, and good neighbors can help mend each other. The late President Harry Truman once wrote, "In order to have good neighbors, we must be good neighbors." So let's see how good the neighborly connection is in Holly Birnbaum's story, Ageless Wonders. Please welcome Holly.
Avi, you're a hard act to follow. It's been said that babies and old men resemble one another. They may have much more in common than their bald heads. At the beginning of life, as well as during the home stretch, and no surprise, most of the years in between, it's just a string of unanticipated events. You never know what's going to happen next. The great experiment is figuring out how to somehow stumble through it all and yet still manage to enjoy the ride. This is the story about how two humans who only recently met have traveled on remarkably parallel paths over a relatively short period of time. A span of 7 decades separates their ages. One, a little baby boy in the room with us in deep REM, is our brand new next door neighbor. The other is my dear sweet traveling companion, lover, expert arranger of all objects, and dare I say it, husband. The two of us have endured some healthcare bombshells that paved a bumpy road. When I had a little bout with bladder cancer back in 2015, I sure learned how the meaning of percentiles changes radically depending on which one you're in. Only 11% of this kind of cancer occurs in women. Fortunately, we caught it early, and it was contained and excised. After a refreshing internal topical chemo flush, there was no need for any further treatment. It was a relative mosquito bite compared to what so many others must suffer through. I've seen it. Then in June of 2017, about a year before our new neighbors appeared, my beloved faced treatment for prostate cancer. He'd been anticipating it for decades, since his uncle died of it and his father lived with it. We just assumed it was the genetic mutation found to be so common among today's Jews. 3 and many more generations before us, our Ashkenazi foremothers and forefathers were living in shtetls and marrying their first cousins, since everybody else wanted them dead. Our ancestors were the hillbillies of Eastern Europe. My eyes are kind of close together. Cancer is a scary word. You're never quite the same person after a dance with this devil. Like most cancer patients, we find our way through it toward a new normal, motivated by the life force. Little did we know we'd have a young traveling companion along the way. Last June, a year after the prostate cancer, our next door neighbor-to-be, baby George, was born. That very same month, my husband noticed a little lump right behind his right nipple, launching a new medical quest through the unknown waters of testing toward a diagnosis. It was attached to the nipple, and if it had to be removed, the surgeon said he'd have to remove everything. Assuming it would be nothing, my husband, ever the optimist, said, "Well, okay, if that happens, then I'll get a tattoo. I've always wanted one." Thinking it wouldn't be too serious, most likely just a cyst. When he went for his mammogram and an ultrasound, he faced the experience of being a man entering the Women's Imaging Center. A female world filled with pink ribbons and stressed out patients. He came home and said, it felt so awkward, like being in a harem filled with anxious women. It must have felt as if he'd wandered into the wrong locker room by mistake. And then he had to go back again for his biopsy. Turns out he did indeed have breast cancer. He actually felt ashamed to even consider it possible. Men don't get it, do they? Only 1% of all breast cancers occur in men. One of his old pals from high school wisecracked, "You're really taking this androgyny thing to extremes, aren't you?" That's true. We were totally stunned. Since my mom had breast cancer, I always thought it'd be me. Amazingly, a full battery of genetic testing revealed no markers that pointed to his prostate cancer or his breast cancer. So unmanly. We've beaten cancer 3 times since 2015. Although it's still scary to think about, we're fine. There was nothing in his lymph nodes and no need for chemo or radiation. So, now I'm married to a single-breasted man. Incidentally, we welcome all ideas for a tattoo, which may happen later this year. But that's another story. I haven't told it yet. Meanwhile, we've really enjoyed getting to know our interesting and fun new neighbors, whose baby arrived last June. They moved into their upgraded old house in August, the same month as my husband's mastectomy. Who knew our bond was about to deepen so intensely? We immediately liked each other a great deal and looked forward to watching baby George evolve from baby to toddler to boy. New blood. It was a positive distraction from our own medical adventures, and there was no need for disclosure yet. We learned that the woman grew up in California, in her own words, in a non-traditional culture with 2 moms. Her biological mom was blind since birth and put her prosthetic eyeballs in place each morning. We made some assumptions about her 2 moms, and boy, did we get it wrong. The 2 women were politically conscious nuns in Chicago in the 70s on the front lines of many actions in the struggle for social justice and peace. After the old friends left the convent, our new neighbor's biological mom got pregnant and married the father, a philandering man of the cloth, who dropped out of the picture soon thereafter. Her other mom, who also has very low vision and can see somewhat, moved in with her old friend to help raise our wonderful new neighbor from when she was an infant. As any parent, single or not, will agree, having a partner for bringing up baby is preferable, sight or no sight. Fast forward to last August, when our neighbor's mom came for a visit to meet her new baby grandson a couple of weeks after my mate's mastectomy. We were excited to meet her since we'd been exchanging stories with her daughter and son-in-law for quite a while. We were invited to dinner, but I got a text that morning saying that Mom had a little accident, so we'll have to reschedule. I remember texting back, concerned that their first aid supplies might still be packed away, and if they needed anything, I could help. Turns out they needed way more than a Band-Aid. Later that afternoon, another text appeared. They were now on their way to the ER in an ambulance. They'd gone to the pediatrician to get baby George and her mom checked out, and he sent them straight to the hospital. What happened? That morning, baby George's blind, former nun grandmother, cradling him in her arms, intended to walk into the kitchen. But she turned left just a little too soon and tumbled down half a flight of stairs, holding him tight, securely protecting him. She fractured her shoulder. Baby George, after being fully scanned for broken bones and possible internal injury, survived the fall with nothing broken or injured, held fast in his blind grandmother's embrace. But what they did discover was astonishing. We went over there for a short visit the following day, just to say hello, meet Grandma, and make sure that everything was okay. Grandma was tolerating some pain, and the baby seemed fine. Although his gaze was not yet focused at about 2 months old, he seemed to be looking up at the lights, and his eyes were quivering a little. Soon the results of baby George's full battery of tests revealed that, unrelated to the fall, he was going blind from congenital cataracts. But because of the fall, baby George could be treated immediately. Blind grandma walked away with the pain and inconvenience of a fractured shoulder, along with the elation of knowing that she had saved her grandson's eyesight. If his ocular nerves and brain had not been able to connect and create pathways within the first 6 months of his life, baby George would have been blind. Was it divine intervention? The following week, baby George had an operation to remove one of his tiny cataracts, and the next week, the other one came out. He was fitted for soft contact lenses and also wears miniature spectacles, all of which is intended to give him the best shot at recovering his full eyesight, paving the way for a life of vision. During the following days, weeks, and months of surgeries and targeted vision therapy, we found we were growing very concerned with his welfare, hanging on to each and every detail of his progress. We wanted to know everything. In fact, on the day he got his little glasses, each of us went over to see him. It was a busy day, so I went to visit first, and a little while later, my husband went over. We both had the identical reaction the moment his bespectacled gaze locked into ours for the first time. Baby George could see. Each of us cried tears of joy. It was overwhelming. By this time, we had revealed to our new neighbors what we had been going through. We wondered why we had developed such an exceedingly strong engagement with baby George's medical journey and road to recovery. It all came clear when we realized that the man of a certain age and the little baby boy were enduring these crises together, each of them facing a fate unknown and full of risk. They were one and the same. We were invited to baby George's baptism at Old St. Pat's, among the only buildings to survive the Chicago fire. As an ancient Hebrew, it's always exotic for me to be in any kind of house of worship other than a synagogue, to witness ceremonies and rites and rituals. I had never been to a baptism before and swooned at the breathtaking beauty of the recently renovated soaring space, brimming with light and spirit. It was also filled with wonder and joy. Only a few months earlier, the future for both the older gentleman beside me and the young baby boy was uncertain. And now, having weathered a storm together, the two neighbors are brave and steadfast, ready for the next adventures.
Thank you. I think we have some people in the audience that are part of this story. Did you want to say anything about them? Or I think there's a little baby asleep in his stroller in the corner.
Does he wear his glasses when he sleeps? You don't have to. He's sleeping. There's baby George! And my fabulous new next door neighbors, and my lovely traveling companion is here with us. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Before